This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you love underground music and movies, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed shirts, vinyl, CDs, and more. Go to portlanddistro.com. Plug in the discount code MikeHill666 for 15% off at portlanddistro.com. Welcome to this week's episode of the Everything Went Black podcast. I have a really special episode for you guys. Big fan of weird fiction, as you all know, and my recent discovery of Cadabra Records brought me into contact with Chris Bozzone, who is one of the main composers at the label. And the label is a narrative-based storytelling endeavor. It brings readings of classic weird fiction as well as new weird fiction by classic authors as well as new authors. All set to these incredible scores by Anima Morte. Chris has done a lot of the scoring and some of the top readers in the field as well. We talk about a bunch of stuff. I had a great time, and I hope you guys enjoy this. And before we get rolling, I just want to shout out the fellow horsemen. Of course, I'm talking about Horror Wolf 666, brought to you by Brandon Legion on Mondays. Tuesdays, we've got Into the Necrosphere, brought to you by Jackie Smith. Wednesday is Everything Went Black. Thursday, Necro Thursday, is the Necromaniacs Horror Podcast, co-hosted by myself, Mike Scandato, Jeff Kashid. And on Sunday, the Lord's Day, Carl Hikara brings you Soul Knocks for all things weird, macabre, and sinister. And I've been on a bunch of his episodes, so you can see me on there yapping along with Carl and some of my other fellow horsemen, Jackie, Ralph, Jeff, all those guys. We've all been on there. We all are on each other's shows. It's a really cool little community we have. Also, I'd like to thank everyone who has supported the podcast on Patreon. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon subscriber for as little as $1 a month, you can support the podcast. $1 gives you access to all of the bonus material. And at this point, we've got bonus stuff coming out pretty much every week. We have whole shows such as Long Shadows and Hollywood Babylon, which exist only on the Patreon platform that you can check out. Also, at $5 a month, you get early access to all of the normal shows. So, for example, as you guys know, everything comes out on Wednesdays. But if you're a Patreon member, you get everything sometimes weeks in advance because we do things pretty far in advance around here. And for $20 a month, that's the sponsor level. If you have a project, a business, a band, or something that you want to promote, I will give you a custom ad read, similar to the Portland Distro ad read I do in the normal stream. And all of these, there's no strings attached, hearkening back to the Craigslist days of NSA connections. You guys can do it for a month or for all eternity. It's completely up to you. Also, if you guys are on social media, definitely check us out. There's Everything Went Black on Instagram and Facebook. There's my personal Instagram and Facebook. You can check out a variety of different things. Pictures of my cat Loki, coffee, band things, stuff like martial arts training, stuff like that. That's all on my personal account. And the Everything Went Black account is all stuff about the show. Anyway, on to the episode. I was really looking forward to this conversation. I discovered Cadabra Records from listening to the Lovecraft E-Zine podcast, and I don't know if you've ever checked that one out.
No, I used to listen to more podcasts, and I haven't been up on them as much of late.
Back in the day, I listened to like all these different things, but recently I've kind of dialed back what I listen to. But the Lovecraft E-Zine podcast, it focuses on literature, on,
Hmm.
it's books. Every now and then they'll talk about a film, and but mostly it's about the work of Lovecraft and weird fiction, and they talk about
Cool.
Thomas Ligotti and Clark Ashton
Yep.
Smith and all the weird tailed stuff, and also modern writers. And they when they mentioned Cadabra Records and that you can get audio versions, like
Hmm.
scored readings of weird fiction, I was all in. So I went right
Oh yeah.
to the website, and it was like I think I bought like four things like at once.
Nice.
So the founder is Jonathan Dennison. He's delegated you to be the ambassador for Cadabra Records.
Yeah, Jonathan Dennison is an absolute visionary. Working with him is such a pleasure, and he's such an inspiring figure to work with. And he's just so full of forward thinking, avant garde ideas that are things that have never been done before. So, Jonathan and I have a similar background in the sense of, loving horror films, horror literature, and soundtracks. And I know that he was really inspired by the wave of horror soundtracks that started getting issued around the early 2010s or so, with Death Waltz specifically, and Death Waltz putting out a lot of Italian horror soundtracks such as Fabio Frizzi's Zombie and things of that nature. And through thinking about things like the spoken words label in the 60s, 70s, Cademan Records, he was very inspired to kind of up that format and bring it to a whole new level. So, of course, there were a handful of titles, H.P. Lovecraft records done, read by David McCallum, and also Vincent Price records, reading Poe and things of that nature, though they didn't have soundtracks. So, it was Jonathan's amazing vision to provide cinematic type soundtracks set to professionally voiced readings of classic and immortal weird fiction and horror fiction.
Yeah, I would say that the label just in general is like a storytelling label, because like in addition to the spoken word stuff, the readings, there's also books and things like that. And it's focused on storytelling. And one of the interesting things is in the last, I would say 10 years or so, maybe even longer, people have really been enjoying like audio, you know, I guess first with when you think about audible.com and like ebooks and things like that, people are listening to, readings, dramatizations, things like that. So for me to experience something like a professionally done reading of a classic story with a film score underneath it, it's almost like the logical next step to all this.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And, basically, because it's only on the vinyl format in terms of these records that Jonathan puts out and Cadabra puts out, I would argue that it makes it an incredibly special and unique experience, because you're setting that time aside to be all in and give it your full undivided attention, whether you're reading along or whether you're lying down on the floor with your eyes closed just following the story and the soundtrack. It's something that is very singular in respect to just really giving your undivided attention to these weird fiction tales. And I know that Jonathan spends a great deal of time, everything from, who is the perfect reader for particular authors, who is the perfect person to do the soundtrack, who is the perfect person to illustrate it and do the artwork for the album art. And, it's really trying to approach it from a vantage point of, how do I make this already immortal piece of work? How do I immortalize it in the form of visual art, in the form of soundtracks, in the form of readings? And, Jonathan comes to this with a very specific assortment of skill sets, because he himself is an artist, is a visual artist, and has been for a number of years. And in recent time, you can see a lot of his art for some of the Thomas Ligotti books that he has and will be putting out as part of Chiroptera, which is, a subsidiary of Cadabra Records, specializing in books. And also he has a music background from the hardcore and metal scene. So, he can really speak to visual artists, and he knows the language because he himself is a visual artist. He can speak to someone like me or Fabio Frizzi because he knows what goes into putting compositions together and how the music process works and so on and so forth.
Are you also involved in the curation of some of this stuff, as far as like how the books and short stories are selected and things like that?
Jonathan is definitely, the primary person in charge and runs everything and makes all final decisions. But because we've been working so closely together for a number of years now and have worked on so many projects, he's really receptive to ideas, and we have a lot of common interests and, turn each other on to stuff all the time. So I've gotten to pitch some things that have turned into records. So that's been a really amazing thing for me because, some more obscure titles that most labels wouldn't touch, Jonathan's all about, because he wants to support, strange kind of oddball titles. So that's been really amazing.
Now, for you guys listening to this, I've been talking about this label here and there over a few episodes. And if you, look at the Instagram account, specifically my personal one, I pretty much post pictures of all the stuff that I've bought from these guys. And you'll see that it's a special sort of thing when you get the tactile version of this stuff in your hands. It's you're holding something, like something special. It's like really great, incredible artwork. The production value, the audio is top notch, and the scoring is like perfect accompaniment to these types of stories. And one of the things that I bought actually right off the bat was The Small People by Thomas Ligotti, which coincidentally you did the score for that.
Yeah. So first off, I'm so glad to hear that about the tactile experience, because I know that that's, something that's really important to Jonathan. And, beyond being a record label, it's a very boutique label because everything is done with the highest care and concern behind, everything from the gatefold jackets, such as the double LP of The Small People, to the material that's used for the inserts and so forth. So yeah, for, Thomas Ligotti is kind of how I got hooked up with Jonathan in the first place, because I went to a Fabio Frizzi show in Philadelphia where I was living at the time, and I had never met Jonathan. I exchanged a quick email or two with him, asking him to bring some records. I didn't know if he would bring some Cadabra records beyond the Fabio Frizzi stuff. So basically, I wanted to fill in some gaps in my collection, and we got on to talking about Thomas Ligotti. And Thomas Ligotti was kind of the entry point for me into all weird fiction and horror fiction. I had read some Edgar Allan Poe and Lovecraft, of course, as a teenager, but it wasn't really until I read Ligotti that I became incredibly immersed in the weird fiction and horror world. And then I, went back and did digger deeps into Poe, Lovecraft, and then, eventually Chambers, Clark Ashton Smith, etc. And basically, The Small People is a really wonderful double LP record, and that was, I believe, if memory serves correct, the third Thomas Ligotti record that I've done with Jonathan and John Padgett, and Jason Barnett does all of the art. So another important thing to note is there's all these kinds of teams within the different releases. So for instance, like I've had the absolute amazing pleasure of working with John Padgett on all of the Thomas Ligotti records to date that we've done. So, John is always the voice of Thomas Ligotti on these records, and Jason Barnett has done all the artwork to date for everything that's been released thus far. So yeah, it's really amazing. And on a music level, it's one of those things where you mentioned it being cinematic, and I completely agree. And unlike, say, some audio books or audio recordings of stories, maybe it has 15-second intro of music and 15-second outro of music, and that's that for the music, or maybe there's some sound effects or something like that in between. But this has wall-to-wall sound. So if it's an hour and 20-minute piece, something like The Small People, you hear a soundtrack that, you know, is striving to be as cinematic as possible from the beginning of the record to the end of the record, throughout. And, you know, the most extravagant kind of big release that we've done in terms of that is H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness, which is a 6 LP set that goes for over 5 hours.
That's incredible, the effort that goes into that. And I can speak to this because on the Everything Went Black Patreon, I've actually my own meager attempts at doing this kind of thing. Like, I can attest to how difficult it is to come up with a score to accompany a read, you know, audio track of a story, you know, and it's like, it's a big, there's a lot of the scope of doing something like that, especially for you know, At the Mountains of Madness. That's 5 hours of material is like pretty impressive, man. And also the fact that the music itself doesn't overpower the spoken part of the spoken component, you know, because it's like, as a musician, you know, my sort of instinct would tell me to overplay in certain parts, you know what I mean? And to be able to have the music rest underneath the spoken part, it's a discipline that is unique to composition for a score like this, you know?
Totally. Yeah, you hit it, because it's always kind of a tightrope walk where you want to serve the story and serve the reading first and foremost, but you also want to give it an enhanced energy that only music can bring to that. So, you know, you always wanted to, so I always think of it in terms of what is the spirit of this story and how is that spirit captured in the reading, and then hitting all the beats to how it's read, the pacing of how it's read, and the content itself. So, you know, based on who the author is and who the reader is, etc., that really informs how I go about it. You know, for something like the Thomas Ligotti records, John Padgett is this amazing, at times kind of manic reader. So I can kind of dart around and have all these pulsations and have, you know, all of these different moments that have a real arc to them. And then with somebody like Lawrence Harvey, who does a lot of the kind of perverse and unusual records, like Edogawa Rampo, for instance. You know, he has a very soft voice, and it is very delicate, and it captivates you and it sucks you in a different way. So I have to write differently for that voice actor and for the material that he performs. And sometimes, you know, that's in the form of maybe more kind of subtle folk music or collage-based music. Like we did a record, Suspiria de Profundis, Lavana and Our Lady of Sorrows, which is the inspiration for Dario Argento's Suspiria, and that's by Thomas de Quincey. And, you know, for that, I talked to Jonathan, and I think he said something along the lines of, you know, think like Holy Mountain and the film Holy Mountain. And I knew exactly what he meant by that. And it's interesting. I think Jonathan and I work a lot together and work so closely together because we can read each other's minds a lot. And we do very little talking about most of the work that I do with him. So we'll just kind of, you know, he'll give me a direction of maybe mention a film or maybe mention a score or something like that, or an artist, a musical artist. And then I'll just kind of run with it. And with the Holy Mountain for Suspiria de Profundis, I was thinking collage, and, you know, I wasn't thinking literally, what does the Holy Mountain sound like? I know what the Holy Mountain sounds like. I love that soundtrack, and I love Don Cherry, who contributed to it, the spiritual jazz artist. But, you know, I was thinking more in terms of collaging different styles and bringing in different forms of fragmented sound from different parts of the world. So for that, it you know, was a combination of playing instruments, playing synthesizers, and kind of hand percussion that's heavily processed, but mixing that with a kind of fragmented style of, highly manipulated string arrangements and even like medieval instruments that I don't have access to, and processing them, and medieval chanting and wordless music and things like that, kind of all into this hopefully hypnotic spell.
Ah, that sounds amazing, man. Now, how much of it is tactile, actual instruments? How much is done with software, and how much of it is synthesizers? Because I mean, what you just described to me sounds very diverse, and having access to certain instruments would be very difficult, I imagine.
Yeah, that goes back to the piece, what's being worked on and what it calls for. So, I almost everything, with some exceptions, is played by hand. So I'm pretty old fashioned in respect to, I don't do any sequencers. I don't do any soft synths. Everything that I play, besides kind of collage style approach, is played by hand. So, a lot of it is for acoustic and electric guitars, but also a whole array of synthesizers, everything from analog synthesizers to digital synthesizers, and also some, like world instrument, for lack of a better term. I play harmonium, Indian harmonium, which is kind of like a drone instrument, like an organ type sound. There's also a lot of Fender Rhodes electric piano on certain records. And and also dulcimer is on Arthur Macken's The Great God Pan, and tambora as well, which is another kind of Indian drone instrument. So it really varies, and I try to keep it fresh and keep it varied. And when it comes to things that are not played by hand, that is most frequently kind of like backing textures and atmospherics. So I grew up listening to loads of records by tons of different types of artists. So, hopefully you reach a point as an artist where everything kind of starts blending together, and you're no longer striving for things. And it's more just kind of a natural bleeding of one thing into the next, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And, when I started doing these soundtracks, I was already deep within my journey and adventure as a musician and as a lover of music and listening to records. So thankfully, I was already feeling very comfortable within the different worlds that I like to occupy sonically.
Earlier, you mentioned that Legati was your entry point into weird fiction. Now, that's interesting because he puts off a lot of people. That's not the kind of writer that you could just be like, oh yeah, check out Thomas Legati. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So how did you become interested in him, and what was some of the work by him that you read that grabbed your interest?
Yeah. So basically, I became interested in him and found out about him. There was this distribution music label in the UK called World Serpent Distribution that is long defunct, and they were putting out or distributing people such as Coil, Nurse with Wound, etc. And they put out a compilation in, I want to say, around 1997 called Terra Serpentis. And it was just like a cheap label sampler back in the day when labels would do that all the time. So you could discover more artists that they were distributing. And one of the artists was Current 93, which is, a folk horror group before that was a term that was used, but also, collage, post-industrial music, etc. And even though I was listening to things like Nurse with Wound and Coil and Legendary Pink Dots, etc., a lot of post-industrial British music, I hadn't heard of Current 93 somehow. And so the track was called The Frolic, or on that compilation, it might be called The Frolicking. So anyhow, that I found out very soon after, because I got the album that alternate take was from All the Pretty Little Horses. And that had a number of tracks that Thomas Legati inspired or was even a part of. in one form, because his voice appears on that album. And anyhow, so that's how I found out about Thomas Ligotti. And I immediately got an amazing collection that's very hard to find now, I think, called the Nightmare Factory.
Yeah.
And the Nightmare Factory kind of collects a lot of his work. I mean, in terms of like, you want a collection that you get out of the gate that blows your mind, the Nightmare Factory is just sheer brilliance throughout, and touches upon everything from Nocturne to Teatro Grotesco, and and collections before that. So, you know, a lot of the stories that hit me the hardest were actually ones that, since I've done records with Jonathan and with John Padgett, these Ligotti records. So, you know, stories like The Bungalow House, and stories like The Red Tower, and Gas Station Carnivals. You know, those were ones that just absolutely blew my mind, and I had never read anything like it. And, you know, you said earlier, which I think is very apt, that Thomas Ligotti is not for everyone. And I've talked to people who just, it doesn't click with them for one reason or another. And I think that oftentimes it's because the stories, while they're so nuanced and so rich in so many ways, they're so suggestive, and they don't tell linear stories in ways that people are used to. And, you know, Ligotti's someone who's drawing from all kinds of literary works, you know, a lot of European surrealism and philosophy and so forth. So, you know, for me, it's like Ligotti is this kind of drug, this kind of spell that he puts you under. And you're just on this journey, and it's hallucinogenic. Whereas you're going through this landscape, and you're transported into another world. It's a portal of sorts. And to go back to the origins of Ligotti, for me, it's kind of funny, because when I was a teenager, so I was a teenager when I discovered Ligotti, and there wound up being a Current 93 performance in New York City in 1999, a little bit after I discovered Ligotti through the Current 93 stuff. And anyhow, John Padgett, who is the voice of all these records, he was doing an opening set, and it was a ventriloquism set. And he was kind of making Ligotti references and jokes, because he is a ventriloquist as well. And he's also an author of weird fiction.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet him at the time, but that performance really stayed with me. So it's funny how life works out sometimes, because then I met Jonathan at this Fabio Frizzi show in 2017. And we just started talking Ligotti, and we just hit it off and talked mostly Ligotti the whole time. We talked about the label and Lovecraft as well, but mostly Ligotti. And I shared some music with him just because we hit it off, not as a pitch or anything like that. I wasn't thinking along those lines at all. And he thankfully checked it out. And then I told him I subscribed, because he runs these great subscriptions where, you know, it's X amount of dollars, and then you'll get 10 records in the course of the next 6 months, 8 months, a year. And I had to support the label. I was already familiar with it, but I'd never been a subscriber. And I actually subscribed. What made me pull the trigger was he announced that he was doing The Bungalow House, and that was going to be part of subscription 3, I believe. Now he's up to 12. And basically, I was like, okay, I have to subscribe and support this label that's going to make a Thomas Ligotti record, and so forth. And then a few weeks after I met him, he said, you know, Chris, do you want to give a try to scoring this? Of course, I said yes, and I immediately knew what it called for, because The Bungalow House is something that I absolutely love as a story, and I wanted to kind of connect the emotional bits with acoustic instrumentation, such as piano compositions and acoustic guitar and things like that, but then mix it with kind of atonality and dissonance and cosmic strangeness through synthesizers. So I kind of told him that was my vision right out of the gate, and then attempted to do that. And he said, you know, why don't you try about 10 minutes and then we'll take it from there and see if it works or not. And I kind of locked myself away for a few days, set up an immediate recording session, and I tried my hand at the entire nearly hour-long record in a day. And of course, it was just a rough draft, but I wanted to go above and beyond because it meant that much to me. And I gave him what was version 1, the end of that session. It was an all-day session, and it was a crazy session. But I said, okay, here it is. I hope you like it. I wound up doing the whole thing. And of course, it permutated, and we worked since that was the first one we worked on together, we worked very closely, and there was many revisions, and that was the first Legati record. So he wanted it to be absolutely perfect. So, we went through the next few months, a lot of revisions and so forth. But I tried to tap into what the sonic vision was right away.
I get so excited hearing about all this stuff, man. I gotta be honest. I remember like even the process sounds so interesting. And I remember when I discovered the label, when I first went to the website, it was like 6:30 in the morning, and I was sitting in the office that I work in New York City. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh yeah, I have to check out this Cadabra Records thing. And then when I saw all this stuff that was available, and of course Thomas Legati is not, like I said, it's not really something for everybody. You have a very specific taste to get into that kind of stuff. And I'm all in. I'm all in on everything you guys are doing, man. It's so cool.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. I totally agree that like there's with Cadabra, it represents, the labels that I really grew up loving and what I really got into. It wasn't just the project itself. It was going into a whole world where by going into that world, you are doing all of this research. You're learning all of these things. And I think Jonathan's real brilliance is being able to open up worlds to people that they may have never known about otherwise through the beauty of these records that he's producing. And he's supervising every single aspect of it. He's doing all the layouts. He's supervising the voice, the music, the art. He has his hand in all of it. And it's so amazingly curated. And, you're entering this world where maybe you don't know about Thomas De Quincey. Maybe you don't know about Robert W. Chambers. You love Poe, you love Lovecraft, but there's this whole other world. Maybe you get into Arthur Machen. Maybe you get into someone like Clark Ashton Smith, etc. So yeah, and it's a really wonderful thing to fall in love with a label and everything that it's doing, and then also you're learning all of these things along the way.
What's interesting is that you mentioned John Padgett and his ventriloquism opening set, and that is like such a recurring theme in a lot of Legati's work. How we're marionettes being manifest by this shadow force. That's not a soul. There's no soul that inhabits your body. There's just like this underlying dark force that motivates us, and I think just like subtle things like that. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with John Padgett. Like the name is something that's very much on the periphery. I thought I'd actually met him, but I was going through some of my notes, and it wasn't him. It was somebody else. Actually, it was at the Necronomicon this past summer in Providence, but it wasn't.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh, awesome! Yeah. So John and I actually did. We've done a series. He's a great friend, along with Jonathan, and we've done a series of live performances over the years, where in different unique places. And we actually the first Cadabra performance in the form of like performing an actual record from beginning to end. We did the Bungalow House a few years back at this place called the Convent, which this amazing visual artist Jeremy Hush, who's done a lot of Cadabra artwork. He has this amazing art gallery that's also where he lives, and it's called the Convent, and it's actually an old nuns convent in Philadelphia. And anyway, he does all these amazing gallery shows and whatnot. But we did a seated performance in the pews of this nuns convent, and played all of the Bungalow House. And John also did some of his work from his book, his collection of short stories called The Secret of Ventriloquism. And speaking of Necronomicon, we wound up doing a kind of like a private show during Necronomicon this summer. And another Cadabra artist that I wound up doing a public performance with, kind of impromptu, and sparked a new friendship. We had already done a record together in collaboration with Pentagram Home Video. For M.R. James's The Count Magnus.
Oh, nice.
But I reached out to Robert when I found out he was going to Necronomicon. I had never been before, always wanted to go. And I was able to go at the very last minute. So I reached out to him and I said, oh, I see you're doing Count Magnus. I know this is like a few days before, but would you want to do Count Magnus live, et cetera. And for a variety of reasons, it didn't make sense to do it. But he said, I'm working on Algernon Blackwood's The Willows. Mm-hmm. Would you be interested in potentially playing The Willows with me? So we met at a pub, and the first night I got in, we talked over his abridgment of The Willows. I absolutely love that story. And strangely enough, that's one of those things that Jonathan and I always wanted to do. And we always say, it would be so great to do The Willows. And the only issue is, like, would it hold people's attention for the entire, I think it would take 2.5 hours or 3 hours. And it's a pretty obscure story.
Well, so, I mean, that's actually kind of, if you were to make like a canon of weird fiction,
mm-hmm.
Algernon Blackwood's The Willows, as well as the Wendigo, I think would be at the top of that list. So it's, as a service to fans of weird fiction, I think you guys should do something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's some exciting stuff in the works with that. So I'll say that much. And we did the live performance. It went off great, and people seemed to really enjoy it. So that was wonderful. And so he's working further on it, as am I. And so that's one of the exciting things in the pipeline.
Now, you mentioned that Current 93 has a track called The Frolic.
Yeah.
All right. So now that is not, I mean, I'm assuming that's inspired by the Legati story, The Frolic.
Yeah. It's not a literary takeoff. I think it's just a nod.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's like one of the more unsettling stories, I think, that he's written.
Yeah, well, that's definitely, I think, a lot of people's entry point to Legati, from what I understand, and it's also part of his first collection, Songs of a Dead Dreamer.
I think it's like the first story actually in that collection. So if you start at the beginning,
it's been a while.
So if you start at the beginning of the book, you're probably going to hit that story as the first one you read.
Yeah, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think Tom was saying something to the effect of, after writing so many unusual, strange stories and maybe not connecting with people as much as he wanted to, that was something that he thought might reel people in more than some of his other work.
That story?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. That's, I mean, for guys like me and you, I mean, that question is almost irrelevant because you and I both connect to his material. But I don't know. It's definitely something that I think if you're reading more conventional fiction, maybe the narrative style would draw you in more. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I hope people pick up on as much as possible is all the humor. There's so much humor in Thomas Legati's work. A story like The Clown Puppet, the beef, pork, goat. Repetition and this constant back and forth to the nonsense and absurdity of existence. It reminds me of in different ways of somebody like a film director like David Cronenberg has a lot of humor in his dark and unusual, surrealistic at times work. So I really like that blending of kind of cosmic morbidity and dread, but also things that are really funny at times too.
No, I would have to agree with you that there is quite a bit of humor. One of the defining stories I think that he's done is The Darkness, the Shadow, which really dovetails nicely with his overall pessimistic philosophy, which is expanded on in Conspiracy Against the Human Race. I think that particular story, if you wanted to like encapsulate what his philosophy about consciousness is or whatever, you would read that story.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that in respect to conspiracy, because Chiroptera, Jonathan's book imprint, he's soon going to release. It's already, there's been a pre-sale and everything, but he's soon going to release this absolutely amazing edition of Tom's first new works in quite some time. I want to say about 10 years. Or 10 plus years in Pictures of Apocalypse, which is a poetry collection. And, he, from what I understand, kind of sees it as an extension of conspiracy. And this book is absolutely gorgeous. I believe there's still some copies available. I cannot recommend it enough. Jonathan has done all of the illustrations and all of the art. So every single poem, I want to say there's like 26 poems or something along those lines, give or take. And every single poem has its own illustration. And it's just something incredible to behold. These works are really powerful and really potent. And Jonathan, I think, really tapped into a kind of suggestive, hypnotic quality of this series of poems that in one way or another, deal with end times, apocalypse in one way or another, etc. So yeah. And actually, there's going to be a festival. I don't know if you saw this online or anything like that, but there's going to be a Cadabra Festival, first of its kind this summer, called Nightlands.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so it's going to be absolutely amazing. It's going to have long-term Cadabra readers and artists and musicians there from all over. And there's an opening night event that's more an intimate event, and that's going to be a Pictures of Apocalypse book and record release. So and Jonathan is going to bring some of his original art, and it's going to go up on the walls and things like that. So that's actually at a very intimate setting at Book Restoration Bindery in Haddonfield, New Jersey. And I actually happen to live right in the area. So it's pretty awesome to have this cool event right in town. And so John and I will be performing all of Pictures of Apocalypse, and Matthew M. Bartlett, the writer and Cadabra reader, will also be there as well, and we'll be performing something together.
The tickets haven't gone on sale for that yet, because I was planning on going to that event, actually.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So no, they haven't. I think there'll be like a general sale for Nightlands itself, either the end of February or the beginning of March. So I'm not sure when this is going to air, but basically, I think the general sale is either end of February or beginning of March. But the event itself is 2 full days. So what I was talking about with Pictures, that's just going to be an evening one-off, kind of a lead-in party event that goes into the festival itself. And the festival itself, Nightlands, will be the main days are June 2nd and June 3rd, whereas the Pictures is June 1st. And those are full days. So those will be full on performances with, like I said, with a lot of the different readers of Cadabra and musicians and visual artists all being there in one place in Hamilton, New Jersey, at this place called Cathedral that I went to with Jonathan. That is, it's a former church, and it's all kind of by itself, like almost like it's on this ground with nothing else in view. So it's just in this field, and it feels almost like you're entering some kind of cult space. So I think it's going to be a really fantastic setting and an experience for Cadabra fans.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I mean, I live in Central Jersey, so yeah, it's only about an hour and a half or so from where I live.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I grew up in Central Jersey. Both my parents are originally from Brooklyn, and I originally was from New York City. But then most of my formative years, I was in Lawrenceville, right next to Princeton.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty much the same trajectory I had after spending, decades living in Brooklyn. I ended up relocating out here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I lived as an adult. I lived in New York City for about 10 years, and then I was in Philly for a bit, and now I'm in South Jersey. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's not too far from Philly, actually. I think Haddonfield's like almost like a suburb of Philly, really.
yeah, it's like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's very quick access, and yeah, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away.
Now you mentioned Jeremy Hush. I've actually known him for, I would say, close to maybe 15 years at this point. He's an incredible artist, man.
Absolutely. Not only an incredible artist, but an incredible human being. I mean, he's just a really wonderful person. And that's another thing about Cadabra is I've just met so many amazing people through the label because Jonathan just has this knack at working with really, really wonderful individuals who happen to be insanely talented as well. And I know Jeremy, he's someone who's so humble and is so immensely talented. And he's also so immensely supportive of fellow artists within that kind of horror world of sorts. So he really showcases a lot of incredible artists at the convent. So that's really cool. And so the roster of visual artists is just insane. Karmazid is someone who just does completely hallucinatory works and is able to really tap into putting his mark on the Lovecraft canon, let's say. So obviously there's been so many visual attempts of Lovecraft over the years, and his work is basically like picking up where Virgil Finlay left off in respect to making a real mark. And I know, he's of course best known as kind of doing like black metal art for an assortment of, but what he does for the label is just like a perfect match. He's also done the Arthur Machen cover art, which is equally phenomenal. And then like Jeremy works really closely on all of the Fabio Frizzi releases. So they got off together working right away on the pictures of the house. And that was the first Fabio Frizzi record. And Jeremy just did absolutely breathtaking art for that. And I think that more or less, maybe give or take one or two Frizzi titles, because Jonathan has released so many brilliant works by Fabio Frizzi over the years now, that Jeremy has been doing the bulk of the Frizzi art. So it's been really cool to see that pairing, another wonderful pairing that you get to see evolve over time through the label.
Also, Joe Kienberger, he's a guy that I've known since I met Joe in like 1995 or something like that, man. I used to live in Boston for a while, and that's where Joe and I met. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, over the summer, I had met him before, actually, in relation to a convent exhibit he had. So I met him with Jonathan and Jeremy a few years ago when he was doing a convent show. But then just over the summer, I was hanging out with Joe and Jonathan. There was a Fabio Frizzi Coolidge show where Fabio was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award and playing a Frizzi to Fulci set, and then also doing there was a screening of Zombie. And got to hang out with Joe that day, and just what a wonderful guy, and what an immensely talented guy. So it's so cool to see the work that he's done for Cadabra as well.
On that first exploration of the site, I was going through all the records, and then I was like, oh, you guys have books too. So, and as soon as I saw the cover for At the Mountains of Madness, I was like, oh, that looks just like Joe Keinberger's artwork. And sure enough, it was him. And added it to my cart, and now I have I'm an owner of a volume of that material. It's great.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and another that brings up another really cool thing with Cadabra. Now as far as I understand, like everything that Jonathan is doing book wise is under Chiroptera. So as I was saying, like he has that Pictures of Apocalypse Legati book.
Yeah.
He's also going to be re-releasing Nocturne with the bonus, very hard to find, The Spectral Link by Legati. So that's going to be a collection that comes out in 2023. But he's also releasing the autobiography of Fabio Frizzi called Backstage and Beyond, which tells his whole life story and working with Lucio Fulci and on the Beyond, City of the Living Dead, Zombie, etc. And but yeah, to go back to what you were saying with Mounds of Madness, it's really cool because with a lot of these books and records, you get different interpretations. So you get to see how different visionary artists get to interpret the same stories from different vantage points. Because there'll be works such as, like I believe, if I remember correctly, Joe Keinberger did a beautiful version of The Color Out of Space for what was at the time a series called Cadabra Illustrated, where it's a book that is a reprinting of, say a Lovecraft tale or a Legati tale or whomever. And then it gets its own little touch by illustrations that are done throughout the book. So Joe did Color Out of Space for the Cadabra Illustrated book. And then the record is another masterpiece by Karmazit. So, yeah.
Yeah, Joe has a very distinctive style, too. It's very identifiable.
Absolutely. And, it's so connected to that Halloween spirit. I'm actually looking at an original art right now that's in my home that Joe did of a kind of Cthulhu creature. And he's just so talented at capturing that Halloween, that October feeling. It just, everything that he does permeates that space. It's really wonderful.
One of the things I saw on the site was Cadabra Illustrated, like a chapbook. Is that part of a series that you guys publish?
Yeah. So that I think it's for now. I don't know if it's on hold or defunct as of now. I'm not sure, but there was at least 10, if not more, Cadabra Illustrated, and that's when it's there's very limited hardcover editions, and then there's softcover editions that they're still small prints but larger numbers, and they're just like the records. They're really something to behold. They're really boutique, the highest quality of paper stock and binding and things like that. And yeah, so there's been different Cadabra artists, like Matt Jaffe has done some Cadabra Illustrated, Joe Keinberger, Jonathan himself has done, like he did The Small People. And yeah, it's a really, really wonderful series. And there's the kind of like micro editions as well of different colored versions and so on and so forth. So collectors can really go wild trying to track these things down.
Oh yeah, actually, all of this stuff is a collector's dream or nightmare, if you will. It's this stuff is very collectible, and it's also the kind of thing that, like, it just looks good in your record collection too. You know what I mean?
It's 100%, and it's one of those crazy things. Like, I remember getting my artist copy of The Bungalow House, and I remember saying to my wife, Julia, and friends and, whomever at the time, you get a record that you worked on that is so beautiful. And, I've been a record collector basically my entire life, and I have thousands of records and, blah, blah, blah. But to hold these things and to go through them, the booklets, the gatefold jackets, the quality of vinyl, just every single thing about it, Jonathan puts the utmost care and concern into, and they're works of art. So not only are they absolutely stunning experiences to go into, but they're also fetish objects.
Yeah,
And
totally.
you know, clearly you're going to get collectors that, you know, that might be why they started getting into it, because they're such beautiful objects, and then they're turned on to this whole other world that maybe they vaguely knew existed, or maybe didn't get deeply into until they got hooked on Cadabra.
Another artist that you guys turned me on to is Anima Morte, the band.
Totally.
And you know, any of you guys out there who are listening to this, definitely check out Anima Morte. They've scored some of the material that was released by Cadabra, but they're a progressive band. If you're into like zombie, maybe some of the John Carpenter stuff, it's in roughly in that vein. You know what I mean? There's like elements of that, elements of King Crimson, elements of you know, Yes, maybe like stuff like that. A Tangerine Dream, like all that kind of stuff, all smashed together, and very technical, very technically proficient music.
Completely. And, you know, between Fabio Frizzi and Anima Morte, they have taken this soundtrack to readings to a whole other level. I mean, the musicianship is just absolutely sick. And like you said, you know, they have all of these progressive rock elements in Anima Morte. And when they did the Dagon record, which I believe is the first record that they did for the label, you know, naturally it just blew people away. And then they went on to do the Call of Cthulhu, the second edition of the Call of Cthulhu, and just did an absolutely mesmerizing, pulsating edition of Call of Cthulhu. And, you know, I learned a lot as a composer, you know, listening to the Anima Morte compositions, because there's this vibrant nature to the scores where it just keeps you going, and it keeps everything electrified and exciting, while still full of dread. And, you know, trying to tap into that kind of sonic space is really inspiring, and taught me a lot as a composer. And then in terms of Fabio Frizzi, I mean, he's the maestro. He's just absolutely legendary. So I know Jonathan and I are, you know, lifelong Fabio Frizzi fans. And, you know, for Jonathan to get to work with him so closely on such a variety of amazing projects has just been completely astounding. And the fact that I've got to, through Jonathan and the label, you know, like got to hang out with Fabio and his band for a bit last year, and kind of hang out with them and go to the Coolidge show and everything. I mean, it was just like a dream come true, because beyond the just enormous talent, just he's a really, really wonderful guy, and his band, all of his bandmates are just incredible. And yeah. So again, it just goes back to working with really great people who are also, you know, in their own world in terms of talents. You know, that, you know, I know Jonathan and I both kind of grew up listening to City of Living Dead, The Beyond, and Zombie, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's killer, man. To be able to work with you know, a master like Fritzy, you know, it's incredible. I actually
Totally.
went on a deep dive with Anima Mortes. I think they have 2 full-length records out as well. And
Yeah, at least.
yeah.
I've lost track, but I know that I know they have some EPs, so maybe even more than that at this point.
Yeah.
And actually, Jonathan put out earlier this year, like a non-soundtrack album by them, which is just instrumental music, and it's absolutely incredible. If you haven't heard it yet, definitely check it out. I believe it's called Serpents in the Field of Sleep. And it's basically like, you know, if you love Goblin, you love Fritzy, but you also love like Vandergraaf Generator and a lot of key prog rock stuff, King Crimson, like stuff you mentioned earlier. And you want like a updated, unique take on that leaves its own mark. Yeah, check out Serpents in the Field, which came out last year. It is absolutely beautiful and stunning record.
Yeah, I'm a new fan, definitely. I there's a a mini documentary on YouTube about the making of one of their records, which I just spent some time watching recently, and it's really cool.
Awesome. Yeah, it is. I just checked it out. It is called Serpents in the Field of Sleep, Fields of Sleep, plural. I'm curious, Mike. I don't know how long you've been in Jersey, but are you familiar with Exhumed Films by chance?
I'm not.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Just because I growing up in Jersey, it was a really incredible experience. Making trips down to South Jersey and to Philly because Exhumed has been a nonprofit film outfit since the late 90s. Actually, I think a little earlier, like 96, 97. And they kind of specialized before repertory cinema became really big. And, places like New York City, LA, now they play horror films on 35 millimeter all the time. And
Oh,
it's, something that's been going on forever. But they kind of started that wave of let's play Euro horror on 35 millimeter. So it's kind of insane. Like when I was growing up and a teenager, I would make trips down to Exhumed Films shows. And, like the first time I ever saw Suspiria was a 35 millimeter print. The first time I saw some of the Fulci films, it was, an archival print. So to see that in a theater and that's kind of your intro to Euro horror, it was just absolutely mind blowing.
now I've been living here for and just at the tail end of my third year. So and some of that time was spent during the pandemic. So a lot of that, there was nothing really going on. So does this place still exist? Is it still active?
So they don't have a regular theater yet. Actually, I don't know the progress of it, but Harry Guerro, who's kind of the person who has amassed this insane film print collection, he's, I believe, if the plan is still on, he's going to have a proper place of his own called the Space,
Oh,
which will
nice.
be a place and it's going to be right near where I live in South Jersey, in a town called Mount Ephraim. And actually, Mount Ephraim was where I went to the first Exhumed shows in the late 90s. But they've kind of had theaters. They've worked with theaters all over the place. So they've worked with International House, which became Lightbox Film Center in Philly.
Yeah.
They've worked with Philomoka, kind of like punk rock DIY venue in Philly. And they've worked with this place in Phoenixville, PA, that I'm forgetting the name, the Colonial. And actually, like, they put on these crazy marathon events that are 24-hour film events once a year. And they've done, I don't remember how many of them now, maybe 14 or 15. Yeah, I've actually been to every single one of them, and believe it or not. And anyway, so they play classic horror films, obscure horror films, everything in between, weird experimental stuff, everything. And yeah, so they're kind of like an institution at this point. And if you ever go to the Lee Heighton area, the Mahoning Drive-In, which
Oh,
really
yeah.
became,
Yeah.
so they do a lot of stuff with Mahoning and did more and more, during the lockdown times, where that was like the only way to see 35 millimeter prints is out in the fields at the Mahoning.
Oh, I've been there for sure. I went there this year for the first time. Well, not this year, 2022.
Nice.
Towards the end of the season, I ended up going. Good friend of mine who might be listening to this, actually, Alex Rosen, excellent guitar player, played in a bunch of bands around here. He's the one who told me about the place. He knows some of the people that run it. So the time that I went, and it's only been that one time, they gave me a tour of the facility, and
Cool.
such a great place, man. It's such an incredible thing to do if you want to camp out, watch like old movies and old horror films, exploitation films, that sort of thing. And just like the overall like punk rock vibe of that place is so great.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the time warp element. I'm 42 years old, so I wasn't going to horror films when I was, 7, 8 years old in the 80s. But basically, you feel transported into another world when you go there. It's like time has shut off, and all of a sudden, you feel like you're in the 80s, basically, because of how they set that place up. And it's an amazing experience.
Did you see the documentary about Mahoning?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was pretty moving.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the story of, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but that's been there for decades. Yeah, I really enjoyed that documentary.
Yeah, I picked up a copy of it on DVD when I was out there. It was really cool.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, Chris, thanks a lot, man. This is great. And like I said, I was really looking forward to our conversation. And so, for everyone else out there, can you give us like a preview of some of the stuff that's been announced that's coming out?
Oh yeah, sure. So basically, first and foremost, the Nightlands Festival that I mentioned, the primary days are June 2nd and June 3rd. So that's going to be in Hamilton, New Jersey, at this place called Cathedral, and the Cathedral is with a K, not a C. And so please come to that, because this is a massive endeavor. So much is going into this. So, really hope that people come out and have a wonderful time. It's going to be, there's never been anything like it. This is, if this succeeds, this will be something that is in between the off years for Necronomicon. So this is kind of filling a void in a space, since Necronomicon is every other year. This will be on the off years of Necronomicon in Providence, Rhode Island. So there's going to be this amazing festival where you'll get to experience Cadabra Records live, and a lot of the greatest works from the label will be performed live in this beautiful old former church. And then the June 1st is that more intimate gathering in Haddonfield, New Jersey, at the Book Restoration Bindery that Dominique Lessie owns, which is a really great book restoration place, and also a bookstore as well. And so on the record front, I know the upcoming titles. There's an absolutely massive Fabio Frizzi title coming up, which is Lucio Fulci's Zombie, done by Fabio Frizzi, and like he did with the Beyond composer's cut a few years ago with Cadabra, where he kind of looked back at the Beyond and then made tweaks and additions. And like you have a director's cut of a film, he did his composer's cut, retweaking his score and adding to it, etc. He has done the same thing with Zombie. So it's basically going to be like experiencing Zombie in a brand new way. So that is a massively exciting record that's coming out this summer. And another record that's coming out this summer is going to be the second Arthur Machen record that the amazing voice actor Lawrence R. Harvey read. I did the score for that, and that will be The White People, and it's a double LP set. Karmazid did absolutely jaw-dropping art for it. I can't wait till Jonathan is able to tease that out. And then we're right around the corner of a brand new subscription. So there'll be a whole other series of titles announced. And one of those, because it's already been announced, I can say it, is going to be a record version of the brand new Thomas Ligotti poetry series, Pictures of Apocalypse, that John Paget reads all the poems for. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting stuff in the pipeline. And then with Chiroptera, the Pictures of Apocalypse is imminently coming out, the book that Jonathan beautifully illustrated, and then the Fabio Frizzi autobiography, and then also Nocturne and the Spectral Link will be reissued by Chiroptera together, which they've never been together before. Nocturne and the Spectral Link are very pricey if you go to the secondhand market to get those Ligotti books. So this will be a brand new way to get them together for the first time.
Yeah, I only have those on Kindle. I don't even have a hard copy of those Spectral Link and Nocturne, the other title.
Yeah, no, they're very hard to come by at this point. I think the last issue of both books was put out by Subterranean, and they're very pricey to get at this point.
And I have my pre-order in for the Ligotti poetry book, so hopefully that, looking forward to that one.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I think you're going to really enjoy it. Like I said, it kind of picks up where Conspiracy left off, but then, from a poetry angle. So yeah, there's just so much brilliance within those poems and Jonathan's suggestive interpretations of visualizing them.
Awesome. Well, that's a lot of great stuff coming out. And, once again, Chris, thanks a lot for sitting with me on this. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure.